All right, good afternoon, everybody. The webinar has officially started and so is the recording. So we're going to start letting people load into the session, and then we will begin session 2 of the virtual Florida Student Athlete Leadership Seminar. We'll give this about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. I have 12 o'clock right now, but we'll give it 1 more minute. All right, welcome back, and thanks to the student athletes attendees for participating in the 4th annual Florida Student Athlete Leadership Seminar. If this is your first session today with us, my name is Quinton Urshak, and I'm the Assistant Director of Marketing for the Florida High School Athletic Association, and I coordinated this seminar. I want to give a special thanks to our event sponsor, Hospital for Special Surgery, along with our speakers from the first session, Mr. Buck Martinez, Chrissy Webb, and everybody from Student ACES. And I also want to thank Mr. Craig Damon from the FHSAA and our student panelists from our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Our members are Ashley Colgrove from Mitchell High School, Tatum Register from Stanton College Prep, and Christian Dollar from North Broward Prep. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. This conference is utilizing the Zoom webinar feature. Speakers and panelists will be on screen while seminar participants are off screen. I will act as the moderator and assist in directing questions or comments from the audience to our on-screen panelists. You should see at the bottom the Q&A feature as well as the chat feature. I'll moderate that to make sure no questions or comments go unnoticed. Participants of the seminar should be muted, but just in case, make sure your microphones are turned off so that we can hear our speaker presentations. And without further ado, we will begin the second session with our keynote address from Dr. Kino Miller. Dr. Miller earned his doctorate in counseling psychology from Indiana University Bloomington with a specialization in sports and performance psychology. He is licensed in both Louisiana and Florida. He completed his sports psychology fellowship at NC State after an internship with the Psychological Resources Office at Oklahoma. Dr. Miller has over 10 years experience serving athletes, high-achieving individuals, couples, and families. He is proficient in the administration of comprehensive clinical assessment, treatment planning, and culturally responsive mental health services. Please welcome Dr. Kino Miller.
All right, virtual claps. All right, how's everyone doing today? All right, we've got some participants and I see the panel is assembled. So thank you very much, Quentin, for the welcome. I appreciate you all for having me today. And I'll try to speak in such a way to where it's engaging, but at the same time, I'm optimistic and hopeful we'll have participation. At any point, if anyone has a question, want me to clarify or elaborate further, I have no problem with doing that, and I look forward to engage the next hour of being really engaged in an engaged dialogue. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint I prepared today. And if you don't peek, let me get it to the first screen there. And I'm going to trust that the caption below will leave us. But what I prepared today for you all is PowerPoint. I'm entitled Transitions Toward Holistic Development for Student Athletes. And the objective is to get us here. And the sneak peek is to be able to talk about what athletic resilience looks like. But at the same time, I want to kind of give you all the tenets and the things that are essential before we get there. So that's just a sneak peek to where we're going. I may glance down at my notes from time to time, but I promise you I'll try to maintain eye contact. Quentin, at any point, if you have a question or a comment or anything like that that pops up and you want to pause or stop, just yell at me. All right, wonderful. Let me make sure I got that over there. That looks good. Okay. All right. So today we're going to kind of give a glimpse of what I've looked at and what I've called and labeled holistic development. With that, there are several different aspects of holistic development being holistic, right? Psychosocial, psycho-emotional, rather, intellectual, aspirational, social, physical, cultural, spiritual, and gendered development. These are different aspects of one's identity that comes online, particularly during the adolescence years and continues to develop on into early adulthood. Today, we're going to really focus on only two aspects, time permitting, psycho-emotional development and then intellectual development. So the agenda would start like this. I'll kind of briefly talk about athletic transitioning in, because I know we have some younger athletes that are going to watch and maybe on with us today. And then we'll talk about resilience and what that looks like, because we always love to think about and talk about peak performance. And I really kind of label that as resilience. And then we'll talk about athletics transitioning out and then offer a summary of today's discussion. So that's just a loose agenda. If I wane at any point, I promise you to be constructive. All right. So if we think about athletic transitioning, right? Transitioning in the sport is an unexpected adjustment for athletes, sometimes from junior high or middle school into high school. There could be a number of different adjustments over that summer or into that first year of athletic competition. Athlete could undergo changes that impact not only their emotions, but also social, cultural factors, relationships, both interpersonally as well as with the family dynamic. The social environment is critical. And really, when we think about the changes that are happening at around 12, 13, 14, you really can't quantify, how that looks very differently for individual athletes, student athletes, as well as non-athletes. I really want to pay attention to that, because we are talking about puberty, we are talking about adolescence, and we are talking about a lot of different normative and sometimes very specific cognitive changes. So I want to kind of keep that in mind. But that could look more physical development as well as intellectual, social. So athletic transition may encompass a number of different things. My quote that I love to tailor as needed is, healthy people make great athletes. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit, but that's where I kind of position my own philosophy is healthy people will eventually make great athletes. So how do we talk about healthy athletes? How do we promote healthy athletes? That's part of the objective and the challenge of today. So my question to anyone who would like to share their thoughts, why would I select this photo when we're talking about psycho-emotional development? Anyone have thoughts on that in terms of my choice?
I think definitely because these two athletes faced a lot of adversity, and their mental toughness was really put into demand recently.
Mhm.
And so they really had to undergo a lot of psycho-emotional development based on the adversity they faced.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Other thoughts,
Well,
comments?
I know Simone Biles, like she pulled out of the individual like Olympics so she could focus on her mental health. So
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I chose these two because it's relevant and it's real time, and we don't make this stuff up. And this isn't science from the 1990s. We're talking about things that are impacting athletes today, your peers, people who are emerging adults, who are still trying to manage and navigate the psycho-emotional network. And so it is very relevant. I wish both athletes the very best, and I'm quite sure that they have great support. And it's just a point of understanding that even at the highest levels of our athletic engagements, we are still managing, some of the elements that we're going to talk about today. So it's very prevalent and relevant. So I begin from my own work thinking about Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon offers three critical questions. And before we move too far, I think it is very profound to understand how you view yourself. And so he asked the question, who am I? Am I who I say I am? Which is a question of congruence. Am I all I ought to be? Um, all three questions promote self-awareness, authenticity, and in a level of self-reflection of how you view yourself in the world. Are you congruent in what you say, how you present, and then is there a level of consistency there? And that's for me is critical for not only just athletes, but individuals who are high achieving to really understand what they bring to the world, what they're offering. And that's a really tough question to ask, someone emerging adolescent, even emerging adulthood. These are tough questions. These are the questions that you have mature adults still trying to answer. But I think it is appropriate really to be able to analyze how you feel about these questions, how you respond to these questions. Is there a reaction? Have you thought about these questions? That's how I would really kind of preference, before moving forward is, have you thought about these questions and how you enter the world? I think that's critical in terms of one's social, emotional development, psycho-emotional development as well. Question, comments about these questions? All right. So once we've kind of dealt with looking internally and really analyzing yourself, right? How fun is that? I really want to look at motivation and really think about it, not only from the intrinsic, extrinsic points, but why do you do what you do? If you've ever thought about that, what is it that I find enjoyable about this? What is it that I find challenging about this? So when we think about an intrinsic motivation, right? We're thinking about participation is inherently enjoyable. And that's really key. That's really essential. Something that you enjoy doing. And it's going to ultimately have a higher level of outcome. Also, you're going to stay with that a little bit longer. But in addition, if you think about it from this perspective, you're focusing on skill acquisition, right? What things do you do? Can you get better at? And if thinking more so about mastery, and we're going to get back to that mastery, but I want to think about it from the perspective of skill acquisition. And once you acquire something, what comes after that? Retention, right? So after you win one championship, what's the goal? I've won one, I'm done. No, if you have time, win another one. And how can I challenge myself to do the very best I can? So this is a little different from extrinsic motivation, thinking about championships where the participation is rewarded. And so sometimes we are motivated by the goals that we set, but also the rewards and the benefits of being an athlete. Think about it from the perspective of what do you receive by being a student athlete? What benefits are available to you? I'll say it that way. And would you consider that to be internal motivation, or is it just the fact that, hey, I like having my name up in lights. I'm trying to, make sure my photo is in the athletic department when I'm done at high school. What are the real goals? It's really something to really think about. Again, extrinsic motivation, X being outside of, focuses on competitive outcomes really versus skill acquisition. So two different levels of motivation. I really want to kind of broach that and make sure I encourage that type of thinking. And then next, the mind-body connection. It's really important to understand your thoughts and how they impact your feelings and ultimately your behavior. If you've never thought about that, just think for just a brief second. When you say, I'm feeling sad, rewind and say, what thoughts am I having? What made me feel sad, triggered that thought and that feeling? And then maybe what behavior that leads to. Now, I'm not going to stay there. I'm going to go to the positive side, right? So I'm feeling happy. So the feeling is happy. So what preceded that? What thoughts may have preceded that happiness, that joy? And then ultimately, what behaviors, what outcomes follow that thought and that feeling? So this begins to underline core belief. So the core belief intensifies the feelings and the thoughts. So if you believe, let's just say, I'm a great student, or take it away from academic, I'm a great brother. Okay, well, if I'm a great brother, I may feel more accomplished after I have completed a task helping my sibling, right? My thoughts align with that. Hey, when I do things for my sibling, we tend to enjoy those things. And it gives me a feeling of, rejuvenation or positive feeling. And therefore, my behavior is more positive. I may smile more when I'm doing things with my sibling. I may volunteer more. Think about it like that. I just want to be a little bit more positive than some of the other things. But the mind-body connection is strong. Promotes a pattern of behavior with a variety of behavioral outcomes. If you're nervous about something, and if that's sustained, don't be surprised if you get sick or you get to have a sore throat or your stomach may be upset, get aches, or you may even forget things. That nervousness is a feeling, and then the behaviors follow. Follow back. Look backwards and think about what are the thoughts that are in my head? What are the preconceived notions? What am I nervous about? Am I thinking that I'm not capable? So really, really be open to that level of examination, if that's okay. So once we've done that, right? We've done the identity check, right? We've done the check where we understand the mind-body connection, right? And then we understand our motivation, why we're doing something. Then we move to what I love to talk about. Almost every meeting I have with a person, I ask them these questions. Optimal health and well-being is essential, right? And so the objective is to function at a high level, meaning both recurrent and acute stress related to life and performance-based anxiety. You are trying to find ways to mitigate that. And this is how you do it. Being able to think about it from the perspective of not only what you eat, but how you exercise, sleep, and restorative practice. So let's look at it from this perspective. And you know this. Everyone on the line here, I'm sure you're familiar with our patterns of eating and eating healthy. But 5 food links to better brain power. Obviously, we know veggies, we know fatty fishes, we know berries, tea and coffee. For some people, that may be a new one. But as you see, some of the research suggests that tea and coffee may boost um, mental functioning, different than caffeine. So really think about it from that perspective. I have my tea here, and I'm a doer as well as a sayer. And then walnuts. I'm always suggesting nuts, walnuts, cashews, pecans, any type of nut. Those are brain foods. And so really when you're trying to promote a level of high achievement or optimal health and well-being, really being thoughtful about your diet is essential. Again, so exercise. So I put stop here. This is for me actually, because I realize I'm talking to a group of people who all you do is exercise, right? All you do is try to get better. All you do is stretch, run, jump, throw. So this is not so much for you all, but I make sure I note this because when you think about exercise and physical activity and the benefits of brain health, this is the reason for athletic competition and participation. And I really want to challenge even those who don't currently participate in a sport, really think about it from the perspective of exercise ultimately helps to improve memory and your cognitive functioning. And so there's a reason and there's positive aspects to why you're participating in this sport and what you're getting out of it. Next, here's our good friend sleep, right? So I like this quote from the professor here. Sleep is not just a waste of time, all right? It's essential to your ability to consolidate learning, okay? And really thinking about that, in a 2014 study, found that there was association between poor sleep quality and reduced gray matter. Think about that. And gray matter is what your brain looks like in the brain's ability to function in fire. And poor sleep, diminished sleep, poor development. So as we begin to think about holistic development, it's not just sleep and I'm not tired and I want to stay up and I want to go party and I want to go study a little bit more, study a little bit longer, study a little bit harder. There's value in sleep. But on the other side, for those of us who are using technology, there's also some negative deleterious effects associated with the use of technology here. And I won't bore you with the research and the science here, but I will go ahead and say our good friends at Harvard found that using your phone or tablet within 2 hours of going to bed had some adverse effects. Take longer to fall asleep, of course. Your REM dream stage will be diminished. Natural circadian rhythm will be disrupted. Your natural secretion of melatonin, that helps quality of sleep, of course, will be suppressed, and you'll be less alert during the day. So not that this may convince you to go dark a little sooner, but thinking about it in the holistic terms, if we're talking about optimal health and well-being, quality of sleep is something we are not going to be able to overlook or sidestep. The next component to optimal health and well-being is restorative practices. We know chronic stress is a problem in our society. Researchers have found that high cortisol levels can impact the brain negatively. And so what I've tried to help people to understand is whatever the case may be, a restorative practice is essential, whether it be laughter, comedy, going out in nature, meditating, reading, whatever allows your brain to hit a reset. This is essential and should be part of your routine and your ritual. So really thinking about restorative practices as something that, you're not just watching a comedy or watching something that you enjoy, a YouTube clip or something along that line, but think about it intentional of how it is making you feel in your brain chemistry. Does it challenge you? Does it make you feel light? Does it make you feel emotional? Does it make you feel happy, or the opposite? Restorative practices can look very different. So there's a link at the bottom if you're interested in just kind of finding out what's sometimes called contemplative practices. I call them restorative practices, but I want to encourage everyone to have at least one restorative practice in their repertoire, and you're able to access that weekly. Next aspect is healthy social connections. Now, this is apparent Because during our experience with distance learning and remote learning, I found out that, oh boy, it is important for us to be socially engaged, socially connected. In addition, maintain healthy social connections. So not just being connected with people in a physical way, but being in healthy situations. So Brofenbrenner talks about different spheres in ecological approaches. So that's the lovely little circular diagram you see there. But he puts it in terms of the microsystems, mesosystems, exosystems, macrosystems, and chronosystems. And basically, these are systems that circle you as the individual and your connection with your environment, your community, your family, your friends, your school. Really thinking about those connections and are they healthy? And what I've asked people to think about is sometimes you have to be selfish. You have to prune connections that may not be so healthy. You have to be intentional in establishing authentic connections. Um, know what you mean and project that. So know the type of space and environment you want to be in, and then project that outward. And then also being selfless. You know, at times you may have to be open to new experiences, new opportunities, increases the chance that you'll build a larger circle, a larger, more genuine, even authentic circle of support. And so be open. So that's the selfless aspect of it. But healthy social connections are key and critical. So now I'm going to transition with another quote. Engaged learners, doing good, make great athletes. Right. So previously, healthy people, now engaged learners, because there's a different aspect I want to be able to tap into, and that's the intellectual development. This is critical, particularly as young adults and now as student athletes. I want to make the distinction because many of these components you're going to use as you enter your athletic field or if your athletic field of play. So really think about it as how do I use that in my sport and how might it help me improve? So I want to begin with Piaget. Piaget is a psychologist, but or a psychiatrist. Um, and I don't want you to bog down with the words here, but the formal operational stage aligns with the adolescent period in your life, where many of you are. And so when you think about this metacognitive, portional reasoning, hypothetical deductive reasoning, probabilistic reasoning, this is probably somewhere in your educational objectives because these outcomes are ultimately what they're trying to achieve in the curriculum. Help you think about the information that you're absorbing, help you reason and deduce, logic, help you work through problems, think about numbers and ratios, think about it from a perspective of not just math, but think about how you might use that information outside of school or in your sport. Could anyone share with me how you may use one of these outside of the classroom, one of these stages or abilities?
Sometimes when I've encountered like a tough situation, I'll use metacognition because, or like, I'll use it to kind of shift my perspective if I'm seeing something kind of negatively, or I'm just kind of thinking about the way I played in my soccer game or something, and I'm thinking kind of more negatively about what I did, like I didn't make that pass right, or I kind of did something wrong. I kind of shift my perspective a little bit using metacognition because I use more of a positive outlook.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that's essential for leaders because sometimes your your response and your reaction may not match your normal temperament or your role on the team. So you may have to take a moment to kind of check yourself, like, hey, well, why am I having this, reaction? I have to do something different. And the more you've worked on these things and more you've developed these things from a cognitive perspective, the easier it may be to kind of flip and turn that into something more of a positive outcome. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. Others? Any others?
I think maybe like probabilistic reasoning, like like going into a game, you can just be like comparing the win to loss ratio of the other team to yours and predicting like who would win that game based off their wins off your wins and like the teams that you played.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And statistics is huge, particularly in baseball or sports that there's greater levels of error than, having a positive outcome. So think about it from that perspective. I mean, if you tell me in basketball, 300 is a great percentage of free throw shooting, that's like, wow, okay, so he may make three free throws out of 10. Oh, I'll just sit back. But really being able to kind of understand your opponents and, understand statistics and categories, I think that's huge, not only in terms of just competitive play, but, how we move beyond. So I appreciate that. So I want to be able to kind of basically lay this out where we're thinking about it not only from an academic perspective, because we are student athletes, and how that is going to apply outwardly. Next, I won't bore you with this, but this is Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm a big fan of Bloom's taxonomy, simply because where your level of learning is and where it's going, think about it, transitioning in, transitioning out. Rote memorization and being able to understand it. The objective is, as you matriculate through your student athlete career in high school, you're supposed to be able to apply knowledge, analyze, evaluate, and then ultimately create new game plans, create new processes and procedures based on your understanding of the problem or based on your understanding of the goals and objectives. So that's where evaluation comes in. But you have to be able to really put all of this together. This doesn't happen automatically, by the way. Because if you're thinking about, I'm taking a test and I'm just going to remember everything, I'm trying to remember everything, think about it in this way. Everything in application. So how might this math problem, science experiment, history lesson apply to you personally? Make it personal. And that will help you really analyze some of the information that you're receiving, evaluate potential outcomes, and be able to come up with the proper solution. So I really want to challenge you all to really think, openly about that and how you apply it. Were there questions?
Dr. Miller, I'd like to turn it over to Tatum because she asked a few questions in the group chat that I'd like for her to address.
Of course.
So Tatum.
So I had a couple of questions. You're doing a great job, by the way. So my first question is, do you think that individual or group sports are more stressful for athletes?
Great question. Going back to Franz Fanon, how you see yourself, how you view yourself, what's important. So I've worked with a number of track athletes who, for some reason or another, view track as an individual sport. And at times it is, but if you look at it more openly, you're collective. You're performing just like, on a soccer team. If you're a defender, your role is to defend a certain area in the space and to support your teammates. So really how you view yourself and the role and what you're doing in that moment is part of how you process what's important to you. So let me go backwards because I want to make sure I'm really going to be thorough here. I am a collectivistic person. So I really, really love being a part of teams. So how I see myself is a good teammate and partner. So I would gravitate toward team sports. And even if I was, I participated, I ran track in high school, I still saw myself as part of a team. So I would look for opportunities to support my teammates while I wasn't participating. I would look for opportunities to, help, teammates maybe stretch or prepare for their race if I didn't have a race coming up. So again, it's the holistic outlook of how you view your role on that team versus some others. It's a little bit more, hey, I'm going to do my job. And they're comfortable in that. And that's okay. And, and we take all types, right?
So do you think it's easier or harder to work with those who are in group sports versus individuals?
Honestly, you've got some individually minded individuals. Yeah, that makes sense. who are playing team sports. But I think ultimately, it really depends. It really depends on what they're wanting to achieve. I'll give a perfect example. Michael Jordan, basketball player, was phenomenal, but he did not win a championship until he learned how to be more of a team player. And that's just the bottom line. So you have some really talented individual athletes who can run down a list of their accomplishments. But if they aspire for greatness in a team environment, then it's going to look a little different. On the other side, you have some very phenomenal athletes who participate, swimming. I think we just did some swimming, or even in the Olympic competition. So we talked a little bit about Simone Biles. She's an individual performer, but she contributes to the team. And so it's really about how people orient themselves in that space. If that makes sense.
So another question I have is, do you treat like the individual players versus the group players with different treatment plans,
Yeah,
or how are they different?
great question. A little bit of both. So you really start with the goals, and we're going to move to mindsets here in a moment. But teams, the first part of the team is to be able to break down walls and build cohesion. And that's what looks mostly different. Is you have to recognize that people come with different identities. And the goal is to remove the separate individualistic identities and form one coalition, one cooperative identity, one goal, one mission, one team. With individual performers, however, the goal and objective is to help them really be able to understand what are they expecting from the sport, what are they willing to put in to sports. So then you're really assessing motivation. We talked about that. You're really looking at that intrinsic motivation, and you're really trying to find that. And so if the intrinsic motivation is strong and then the understanding of identity, then you're able to have different building blocks. But the difference is with the team is shedding those individual identities, and how do we build more of a coalition here.
Okay, thank you. Also, I have a question about, do you meet with very many athletes that are experiencing the over justification effect?
Yes. Yes. And that's part of the work that we're doing right now, is to try to help people understand multiple identities and understand when it's okay to remove yourself from one space and really just be, just be Tatum, and just be, a daughter, or be a sister or a sibling and things like that. And then help them understand, yeah, you're wearing multiple hats, you're wearing multiple lenses, but how do you do that in a way that will allow you to perform very well in multiple spaces? So the goal is to promote high achievement and optimal health and well-being, not only in the field of play, but also at home with friends, with your family, socially, emotionally.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, of course. Great questions. Thank you. So I want to kind of move and really trying to delve a little deeper into what Tatum was speaking about a little bit. But before we go too far, here's the reality. So think about it from this perspective. School, it can be difficult at times, but with the proper skills, it can be rewarding. You're going to work hard. And again, there's no magic pill. There's no magic resource, right? Really be thoughtful about that. Hard work, effort, reward. The struggle doesn't mean you're mistaken. It's just an opportunity to learn. So this is more so the growth mindset. I really want to impress upon you what that looks like. So we think about this. Failure is an opportunity to grow. That's hallmark, and trying to get you to the place where your failure is just getting you further and further to a point where you want to be. That's the growth mindset versus failure is a limitation. I can't, I won't. That's more of a fixed mindset, but I would also argue that's a little bit more negative. What we're trying to encourage is adopting what growth, what I call a mastery mindset. You acknowledge, you embrace, you try, you're going to use different language, the values, the emphasis in the learning, and ultimately how you find it, the outcomes. And so acknowledging imperfections, right? Embracing challenges, trying different learning approaches, being open to that. Using maybe the word yet, because we're not talking about everything in absolute. It's yet. I haven't mastered it yet, or I haven't had a chance to take that yet. I've not learned that yet, you know, the value of the process, right? Really being understanding and open to, hey, I want to learn that. Hey, I'm going to go to practice. We're learning some new plays today. Think about it, both inside and outside of the classroom. Growth over speed, right? And once you learn it, then you can do it faster. And then learning from critical feedback. Sometimes what your teacher, right, what your parents, what your coach says to you could be very critical. It could bruise your ego a little bit. But what are you learning from that ultimately? You know, what are the takeaways? Really think about it from a positive growth and mastery perspective. What are the positive takeaways here? Hey, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't give, if they didn't care, they wouldn't give me the feedback. That's an option. And then finding inspiration in the success of others. Inspiration. So I point to the Olympics again because it's that time of year where we all marvel at athletic accomplishment. And that's a good place to say that's inspirational. But I would argue that when we also see athletes who are very human in the face of the world, that's also an opportunity to be inspired. So when we identify the goals, the objective is to increase motivation, or actually why goals. Well, that's crazy, why goals. Obviously, we want to increase our motivation, help organize time and resources, increase efficiency. So that's a pretty good, honest view of why do we make goals. And then what we want to understand is measurable goals. And I'm going to open up another window here and kind of talk about that. But we do well versus pass. You know, really think about measuring. How do you measure your goals? Being flexible. And you want to be apply this more than just the academic outcomes. Holistic development, that's what we were talking about. This is essential. How do you apply this more holistically in terms of goal setting? So what I typically use are SMART goals: specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound goals. And I have a slide here that kind of shows an example of how to do this. And I won't go into this, but you want your goal to be very specific. If you say, I want to, let's say, I want to learn how to drive. You want to say, I want to learn how to drive this summer. That's specific. Measurable. This summer. Summer is how many days? In 3 months. Let's just say in 90 days, I want to learn how to drive. That's a SMART, measurable goal. We're going to get to the action-oriented piece. Realistic. Is it realistic? Do you have a car you can drive? Are your parents allowing you to drive? Do they have time to take you on lessons and the space to allow you to drive? Is it realistic? And is it timely, right? Do you have the time to really work on the skills to be proficient in 90 days? Or is your schedule from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you just don't have the time? So really think about it. Is it timely? The last piece is the action-oriented. What are the steps to learning how to drive? Have to have car keys, have to have a car with gas in it, have to have a parent or a guardian, someone in the car with me to give me instruction, or a driver, educational leader. What else? Do I have the action-oriented? Do I have the skills to negotiate brakes and gas pedal, right? The skill. Am I trying to learn manual? Do I have the coordination to be able to shift gears and drive? All of those things. If not, how do I learn that? That's the action-oriented piece, the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps of how to get that goal achieved. And that's a SMART goal. And I use that all the time when I'm working with athletes. So here's the formula. We've talked about it, right? We talked about everything, and I said I'm going to be brief today, but in just these two aspects, right? The psycho-emotional and then the intellectual, we have a formula to try to help reach the summit. Right. So I gave you a preview. It's resilience. So we're talking about how do we put these together and what is the last piece of the formula? And that's resilience training. And that's the part that we all think about in terms of how do I become a peak performer? How do I become the athlete that I dream of being? It's the resilience training, but I'm going to make sure I say this in such a way we recognize the other components have to be embedded somehow, some way. It may not look like this model, but it should somehow be embedded. Optimal health and well-being, there are tenets to that, things you should be doing to help manage and grow and develop. And then the intellectual development, because that translates both in and outside of the classroom. But many people ask a sports psychologist, hey, how do I get better? How do I get more intense? How do I perform at a peak level? Well, let's think about it from the perspective here. So it's a developmental program. Think about resilience characteristics. The ability to cope with multiple stressors. Right? Can this person turn it on and off when needed? Right? When you find yourself stressed, are you able to compartmentalize? Being confident, unshakable sense of self-efficacy, recognizing that I know I have the capacity and the ability to achieve it at this high level. I believe I can meet my goals. Sometimes that's unique. And how hard you work, you have to be able to assess. I think I can do more. I think I can contribute more. That's part of being confident. Being determined, how to push back boundaries of physical and emotional pain while still maintaining technique and efforts and practice in the game. So being determined to finish, be determined to have a different outcome maybe than a previous outcome, how to finish at a higher level. So if you were only able to max out 10 reps last time, being determined to, develop, and then next time when you test, max out 15 reps. And going back to those SMART goals, you create a SMART goal around that, and then you begin to work that process. Being focused, not allowing external events to distract you. That's essential, and that is critical to being able to become more resilient. Tending to relevant clues in the moment, what a potential distractor is, right? And you're attending to that very early. And that way it doesn't become a full-blown distraction. You have a friend who always has new information, loves to share new information, but you're trying to go to sleep. That may be a text you don't want to read at 9 p.m., particularly if you're trying to get some good sleep. Maybe that's a text where you say, hey, let's talk about that tomorrow. Remember, being focused and being about your plan. Being balanced is essential, not being adversely impacted by performance of self. Don't get too high, don't get too low. Being understanding that, hey, there are going to be good days and there are going to be days where it's more challenging. And every day, your consistency is to, hey, I'm going to maximize my potential every day. That's being balanced, right? Weighing out the highs and the lows. That desire and insatiable desire to compete and succeed. That's that hunger, right? So when we think about elite level athletes, sometimes we always talk about, wow, he really wants to win, or she really wants to win. She wants this very badly. You can see the determination in her face. Sometimes that shows outwardly, and then sometimes you see a very blank face, right? And the goal simply is to be able to manage that within. We talked about motivation. So if your intrinsic motivation is competing with yourself and trying to offer the very best you can on every day, practice, game, your desire may be something that you want to kind of tap into and really be able to harness. And that's a resilience characteristic. And then what I call the X factor, the grit, that toughness. That's the 1%. And I've worked with athletes, and I have no problem with saying I've worked with athletes who are in Tokyo right now. And I have to tell you, they had to develop that X factor, that desire to succeed at no cost, that desire to push themselves. That has to be developed. And so that's why I say championship mindsets are trained. You train. You don't pop out and come to practice already knowing what it takes to become a champion. So everything we talked about, right? Psycho-emotional, intellectual development, and then the others, All of those things must come together and coalesce to be able to maintain or grow and develop a championship mindset. Are you influential among your teammates? You know, we talked about the difference between individual performers and collective team sports and team performers. How do you handle pressure? It looks differently for individuals versus a member of a team. Some people handle pressure very, I would say intentionally, but it could be internally. But their intentional aspect is maybe to isolate. And you don't see them until it's time to perform. Others may be very vocal. And so if you're a member of a team, but you're more internal, you may not, communicate very well or very effectively when it's pressure time. So just think about it in terms of championship mindset and some of these descriptors. So I want to transition to the final area, which is transitioning beyond high school athletics. And I did use this logo because it's an example of a logo which has been transitioned. This particular school no longer uses this logo because of the feathers there. So sometimes we have to transition organizations, we have to transition images, icons, we have to transition as individuals and performers. So really think about juxtaposing those transitioning in and who are learning how to maximize their potential and perform at a very high level to those who have now retired or they're about to retire. So athletic transitions here. Roughly 80% of athletes experience a healthy transition, so that's positive, right? However, 20% report having problems during this experience. And we want to really be mindful of the support systems, the athletic institution, the athletic administration, the coaches, the parents, the community, in terms of how we support these athletes. One of the best ways to prevent a difficult transition is to prepare for this, right? And so this is why we're having this conversation now, because honestly, we never know when we're going to retire, particularly if you're a high level performer. Athletes who plan report less problems and a healthier experience overall. So this is something to always be thinking about, holistic development. You're more than an athlete. And I'm challenging you all to develop yourself well beyond just your athletic potential, because we all retire. Remind yourself of the positive aspects of the transition, right? More time to explore other hobbies, gifts, talents, interests, social groups, different social groups and teammates, maintain a regular schedule. And so the goal is maintain sleep, school, work, exercise. Regular schedule helps you maintain while you're transitioning. So really being thoughtful and mindful of schedules are good sometimes. Staying in contact with coaches, teammates, trainers, advisors, etc. I think that's very essential in terms of being healthy in terms of your transition. These are people who've been around you in your life for a number of years. And the goal simply is to how do we continue to gain from them as well as contribute in those communities. Mentor or coach young athletes. Again, you have something to offer and you have something to give back. And then participate in alumni games and workouts. Again, these particular relationships you cultivated, they don't just go away because your career's ended. So continue to know that you have people who are going to be interested and invested in your continued development and performance. And then identify goals for the future. Goals help to increase and maintain motivation. We talked about goals. All right. And then here are some examples: exercise goals, maybe retaining or maintaining weight, relationship goals, outside hobbies, other lifestyle changes. I know a lot of folks who they say, well, when I have more time, I'll do this. Okay, it's a good time to start doing that or start really thinking about that. Really think about how to strengthen relationships outside of sport. So those are some of the things I would think about. So let me this summary here. I think I've got a couple minutes. And hopefully I have a few moments for questions. But yes, healthy people who become engaged learners make great athletes who have fulfilling athletic careers. really thinking about, there must be intentional efforts. I really want you to think about the intentionality. How do you promote and sustain environments of optimal health and well-being? And if we begin to review the tenets of holistic development, in full, I encourage everyone to attend in attendance to really examine your efforts toward maintaining or investing in a healthy and invigorating mind-body connection. So I want to be thoughtful, but also mindful of time, but hopefully hear from those in attendance today. So with that, I'll open the floor for any questions I have. I've got a few minutes.
All right, if anybody has questions for Dr. Miller, I encourage you to utilize the Q&A feature that you can see at the bottom of your screen, or the chat feature. If you'd like to provide any comments or questions to Dr. Miller, and also open it up to our Student Athlete Advisory Committee members. If you have any comments, feel free to get us started if you would like. I'm not seeing any comments or Q&A questions. Do you have any final comments from our student panelists? Okay, no. All right, Dr. Miller, do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom? You can, oh, we do have a question.
Question, yay.
Yay, all right. Do you have any recommendations for captains or leaders on the team? This is a question from Sage.
Yes, great. Thank you, Sage. I appreciate that. I always like to get at least one. For captains, I would say, but and again, going back to Tatum's question, team sports, right? And captains in particular, really invest in knowing those who you're going to participate with, your teammates. Really invest in knowing what's going on in their world, what's going on in their life, both on and off the field. Again, part of being a leader is to know the strengths and areas of growth for the people who you are leading and ultimately performing with. And so I can't speak more highly about really taking time to invest and engage with those individuals at a very basic level, not just about the sport. Talk to them about family, talk to them about school, talk to them about their future plans, their goals. The more of the things we talked about, their outside interest, their family dynamics, their passion for the sport. Are they intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? You want to know these things about the people who you are going to lead and ultimately perform with. Championship teams are those that are built or have built a highly engaged group, a highly cohesive group, that they communicate very easily, both in the locker room and outside. But that takes work as the leader. And so you have to start that process of communicating, be open. You're not always expected to be vocal, but be present. That's what I would say.
Do we have any other comments? Oh, I'm sorry, Ashley. Go ahead.
I actually had kind of a similar question. So I do swimming, which, as you kind of had mentioned, it's one of those individual yet also a team sport. And so kind of going back to captains, like sometimes I will get a little in my head before races and get all serious and in the zone. But I still, as a captain, would have to be present for the team. So I was wondering if you had any tips of like controlling yourself, but still being there for others.
Absolutely. Sometimes your pre-performance routine may start a little earlier. It's just like a leader, any leader, if you're expected, I teach, so I've had to get to class early to prepare my slide, to prepare everything that class is going to go smoothly. And so if you're in a leadership role as a captain and the individual performer, you just may have to start your process, the work you do for yourself, a little earlier. And so that may look like, you get there 20 minutes earlier and you do your pre-performance routine, you do your mental prep work, maybe the night before, and then you spend the last maybe 30 minutes before competition, really being present and aware of what's going on with your team. Being a part of the team is huge, but really starting early on your own stuff and your own work. That's what I would say. It may be helpful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do we have any other comments? Thanks Sage for your question. Thank you, Ashley, for your question. I'm seeing none, so I want to thank you, Dr. Miller, for your first presentation. I know I personally learned a lot. I'm going to take a lot back with me. Before we transition to our final presentation of the virtual Florida Student Athlete Leadership Seminar, do any of our panelists need a quick 5-minute break before we go into sports and diversity, or is everybody good to go?
Maybe a quick break.
You want to take a quick break? Would that be good? I have just about 1 o'clock on my watch, so can we come back and get started about 1:05? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all, and we will resume at 1:05. All right, the recording has resumed. I want to thank Dr. Miller for giving us some more perspective and insight, especially on student athlete mental health. I think we can all agree after this past year and moving forward, getting certain things put into perspective from a student athlete mental aspect is really important. I will be sharing Dr. Miller's contact information with everyone if you have further follow-up questions. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need more examples or anything you can do to keep a good mindset for your team and for yourself, most importantly. Our final presentation of the virtual Florida Student Athlete Seminar will be from Dr. Miller and members of our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. This presentation will focus on sports diversity and trending topics within this realm. Before we begin, I'd like for our student athlete panelists to introduce themselves once more, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Miller. So Ashley, do you want to get started?
Yes, hello, my name is Ashley Colgrove. I go to Mitchell High School and I swim.
Hi, my name is Christian Doler. I go to North Broward Preparatory School and I play track and I play soccer and run track.
Hi, my name is Tatum Register. I go to Stanton College Preparatory High School in Jacksonville, Florida. I play soccer, I run track, and I run cross country.
All right, thank you guys for that introduction. And Dr. Miller, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all again for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great. So here's the panel. And so I'd love to get some lively discussion and just kind of really thinking about things. So timely. We know we've dealt with a lot of challenging situations, new situations, as it impacts how we view ourselves collectively as a society, but also individually, I'm sure. So my first question is really thinking about diversity. In your worldview, how do you define diversity? So I'd love to hear a thought from everyone if possible. How do you define diversity?
I mean, quite simply, in my mind, is just people that have different backgrounds, whether it's their race or ethnicity or gender or even like physical or mental abilities, any of those.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Building off that, like same thing with that, but also like recognizing and understanding each other's differences and acknowledging and respecting them as well.
What are your thoughts, Tatum?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sure. Just how do you define diversity, personally?
I certainly think it's celebrating inclusiveness, understanding differences of our peers, and being willing to understand and relate to their background and cultural and ethnic difference.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Just curious, let's just say prior to this year, prior to COVID, everything seems to jump off March 15th, 2020. Prior to COVID, had you really thought about what diversity looked like or your own feelings about diversity? Had that ever been a topic of discussion maybe in your social group?
For me, since my school is pretty diverse, in that there's a lot of people from different ethnic backgrounds that attend my school, and my friend group is pretty diverse. So we talk about like different experiences we've had dealing with racism or being stereotyped or microaggressions. So we definitely related on that level.
Not on a sports standpoint, but like for the school, we have like a multicultural week. Like we have a residential village, so we have people from all over the world come in, and like we have basically dorms. So we celebrate a multicultural week where we celebrate like each of the cultures of people that came in like on specific days, and that helps us understand and respect each other's differences, and it's good for bringing in unity throughout the whole school.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
And I know my school has a club called the Melting Pot, which kind of, as the name hints at, is just a mixture of students with various backgrounds. And I know occasionally there will be videos played in classrooms kind of acknowledging different issues around diversity, but not everyday situations, just kind of once in a while.
Once in a while. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. And then the last piece of that question I have to ask, because I am talking to athletes, any thoughts about your own privilege when it comes to being able-bodied?
I kind of think from an economic standpoint, I know that soccer, playing club soccer is very expensive, and I play ECNL, which is Elite Club National League, and that's like a couple of thousand a year. And so I know that my parents have to pay a lot for that. And I recognize that on like other parts of towns, people that are less like economically privileged than I am, they're not able to play soccer at like elite levels like I am, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I feel like that's not really fair to them because they get less opportunity because they have less money.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Kind of going off of more of the economic viewpoint, with swimming, especially with off like out of high school season, the club swimming,
Mhm.
you have to pay for the facility, and sometimes depending on where you go, there's extra fees for just the pool if you use that, and it can be quite expensive. And then whether or not you pay for the equipment or have to borrow it, the place I swim, there's a lot of equipment that's provided, but not everywhere has that. And I know sometimes we'll do fundraisers, which is very helpful, but it's not really the easiest to access for anyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you all. That's wonderful. Those were wonderful thoughts. So think about it from a high school perspective and being a high school athlete. Why is diversity important in high school athletics? I mean, for the person who says, well, why are they having this conversation? Why is this something that should be discussed? What would you say to them? Why is it important in high school athletics?
I would say if you increase diversity amongst your team, you're able to increase the creativity, and there's a lot of greater efficiency in production, and there will be a lot of increased sensitivity to unfamiliar ideas and accepting different points of views. So teams will be able to get along with each other, understanding each other more.
Mhm.
I think there can also be some cons as well, because there can be a lack of cohesion
Mhm.
due to the fact that there's a lot of polarizing views or polarizing like viewpoints,
Mhm.
but it is beneficial in a lot of increased creativity. So.
Okay. I like that thought. Thank you, Christian. Any other thoughts on?
Um, oh, so I think like high school, we're all still relatively young, and it's kind of like a stepping stone to the real world. So I
Mhm.
feel like having diversity within sports really helps young people get to understand more issues early on and kind of how to work together and tackle those kinds of issues, and kind of have an understanding of what to do when you're out in the real world.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So I have a question. I'm a fan of movies, and if you can think of one movie, if I'm wanting to talk about diversity, and I want to show a movie to my team, any suggestions?
Remember the Titans?
Oh, it's classic. TV shows also are great. So I mean, anything. What would you recommend based on what you may have seen, or it doesn't have to be sport related? What maybe would be a great something to view that may be able to promote more of a dialogue around diversity? It could be. I like to remember the Titans. My son has got me watching All American. And I think I've watched, I think I'm up to speed. I think I'm on all the seasons now. So it's on, don't know what channel it is, on CW maybe. But they definitely cover topics related to diversity in high school. So that's one I'd highly recommend. All American. It's on Netflix too. Any others?
I know I think it's more of a comedy, but you think like Blackish maybe? I don't think I've watched it, but it seems like something that might promote it.
I think so. I think so. Blackish, mixedish, grownish. I think they all cover, topics of diversity and what it may be like for that particular family, trying to live an authentic life, and maybe some of the challenges that the young people, particularly in the family, overcome. So I think that's a great one.
And I think also Atlanta with Donald Glover is his name.
Okay. I haven't seen Atlanta yet, but is that a good show? Pretty good?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good? Okay. All right. Put that on my list. That's on Netflix?
It's on FX, so it might be on Hulu.
Okay. Hulu. All right. All right. So that's a good start. That's a good start for those of us who are not as familiar with some of those things. But yeah, definitely thinking about how we might be able to broach these topics in a really non-abrasive way. I think that's huge, particularly when we're trying to, promote more of a dialogue with our teammates. So let me move on. I want to talk about some of the things that are happening, and not to get too political, but we know that the state of Florida has changed how education looks. And I'll be very vague there. I mean, we know the politics right now are contentious in our country. But we recognize that there was a legislation that came down on the topic, or the teaching of what they described as critical race theory. And throughout my PhD, I was familiar with critical race theory because many of my colleagues use that as a methodology in their dissertation. But now it looks a little bit different in terms of really being able to think about what's being taught in the classroom. So my question to the panel is not political, but it is, how do you receive information about race and ethnic diversity? How do you receive it, and how do you talk about it?
Well, we have a lot of clubs promoting like certain diverse and cultural backgrounds. Like we have a Chinese club, we have a BSA, which is Black Student Association. And most of the times we cover topics and we refer it back to the whole student body. And that's a good way to get people more accustomed to different cultures and backgrounds and stuff.
Okay, clubs are good. So there are clubs that are culturally based in your school, Christian? Okay, good deal.
We have the same thing at my school, except we also have a multicultural club. And like at the end of the year, they do like a huge production where each of the cultures have a dance in the show.
Okay.
And I feel like that helps us celebrate various cultures and diversity.
Okay, good. Hey, Tatum, really quick follow-up question. If there was one thing you would like for them to do more, what might that look like?
I would certainly think like maybe like how Christian school does it, where there can be a week or even one day where there's an ethnic fair, maybe, where each of the different groups, like each of the different cultural groups, can have their own table set up, maybe during lunch, or it can be an all-day thing where they have their table set up with their music. They can have people dancing, maybe have arts and crafts that are native to their culture, and have food also from each of the different places. I think it could be a really fun activity that gets people familiar with foreign groups.
Okay, yeah, different cultures. different communities. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Ashley, any thoughts about what's happening in your world over there?
So, kind of outside of school, I know that social media has been very good. Not, I don't know how to put the words to it, but it gives, like, it spreads information like crazy.
Mhm.
I know it's just social media has been very on the rise, and it's like harder to find someone who doesn't use it than to find someone who does. And so, I don't know, I think that it's kind of good in a way, especially how it can spread the word very universally and quickly.
Mhm.
Like anybody can receive information from home, kind of similar to news, I guess. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So a follow-up question. So social media, if you read something or saw something on social media and it was interesting, it was new, you'd never heard of it, or you didn't know if it was really valid, how would you follow up on something that was interesting, but you wanted to know more about it?
Right. So sometimes I'll see certain posts, and I mean, posts are so short and don't really give that much information. So I'll be like, what is this issue? And sometimes I'll go research on simply on Google, like what does this mean? What is this? And then I'll kind of fall down a rabbit hole of reading a bunch of different articles and different perspectives. And it's really interesting to see like not only information but different opinions on it. I think it's really important to take in both.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's an intellectual development. So keep doing that. Absolutely. So thinking more about this, so how do these topics, and it could be any type of diversity, it could be gender, it could be race-based, ethnicity, it could be um, ableism or someone who wanted to participate in sport. And I think in the NFL, and I thought it was interesting. I think if I'm not mistaken, a player for UCF. I don't know. I think he may have been born with one hand, but he was able to compete at a very high level as a student athlete, apparently in high school and at UCF. And he actually was able to I think he won the contract or he got drafted as a free agent by the Seattle Seahawks, if I'm not mistaken. So we see there are people with different abilities who are able to compete. And I'm really enamored by, I love the Olympic Games. And then shortly after is the Paralympic Games. So we know ableism is a thing. Well, my question is, how do topics related to diversity impact or shape your team individually? Are you able to share anything that you all have learned or you all have discovered on your team or at your school? Because I know I have some, I think Ashley is my individual performer, but she's part of a whole team. So what
I
is it?
think for me, like I play soccer, and a lot of the times, like for the past like 4 years, whenever we get like an international player or someone that of different cultural background, they bring in certain aspects of the game or certain different drills, different uh like training methods that may help us succeed in the future. So like it just brings in like more diverse training like methods and plays that may benefit us during games instead of just like sticking with the consistent
Uh,
same stuff.
okay. Now, is that formalized? Does the coach kind of ask him to show the team and you all kind of practice it, or is it more informal after practice?
It's kind of, I mean, sometimes we have like meetings like in person, like we go over game film and stuff so we can like talk about different ways to improve our game using different methods and different um, like how they used to do it in like their home country or how they and stuff like that. So I mean, it's not usually in practice, but like we usually we have like group chats and stuff so we can talk about it and like during that period.
Okay, good, good. Have you all improved, or has there been any notable replace or improvement?
I would say a lot of like our like we have a couple of kids like from Spain, and they bring in, I think, a lot of really good aspects to the game that have helped us improve.
Yeah, good, good. Imagine you all are very competitive. Other thoughts of how diversity or diverse players or ideas have impacted your team? I think Tatum, you all are pretty diverse in terms of your makeup, and you're competing in cross country and soccer. So I know that sometimes that looks very different in terms of the performers.
Yeah, so I was gonna say on my club soccer team, or at least on my old club soccer team, they were pretty homogenous.
Mhm.
It was a pretty homogenous group. So I feel like exposing them to diversity, like I was the only African American girl on their team, and exposing them to diversity kind of really I feel like it opened up their perspective, and it challenged stereotypes and misconceptions they had. On my cross country team, I don't really, no one is, we're pretty diverse because the high school team, and like I said, my high school is pretty diverse. So they don't really, there's no racism really there, or stereotypes or microaggression, nothing too blatant.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah, that's absolutely something that I'm picking up on. When you've had these topics of discussion, when your community is diverse, it's not something that is unique, and it's something that is actually probably celebrated. I've heard that, really discussed here today. Actually, what about your swim team? Um,
So it's kind of hard because it is kind of it's hard to share since we're very like just practice, face in the water, not much discussion going on. Um, but I mean, kind of diverse ideas. I mean, sometimes we'll, I mean, individually outside of practice, watch different videos from different coaches, different swim places, and kind of get like different backgrounds. Like they do this different. Why? And pick up different techniques and see what you can really apply to yourself.
okay, right. So you all are just looking around the world and trying to see different techniques and just really try to see, hey, this is something we may be able to use to, practice. This is a great technique we're finding that they're doing here. I can't remember. I think it's the University of Georgia. Their track and field coach um, is a nationalized citizen to the U.S. And it's really interesting, really hearing. I was reading an expose about him, but he was bringing a lot of information from it. I think he's from Eastern Europe, but really bringing a lot of information about his home country and different techniques. So I think that's really helpful when you're really utilizing the world as your palette and really thinking about what does it look like in different places, what are different techniques, how do we learn, using a global community as our resource. Really cool, really cool. So let's shift on that. Are there examples of conflict, maybe related to cultural differences that occur within your athletic team or that have? And if so, are there any examples of how a resolution was sought? Love to kind of talk about that or pivot, and we can kind of have a discussion. It could be hypothetical.
Well, last year we had a Brazilian striker on our team that didn't speak English very well.
Mhm.
And so it was kind of hard to communicate on the field and get his perspective on a lot of things. But we had another Brazilian player that helped us because he helped translate and give his thoughts for us. So that was like the solution that we came up with. So that was good. But yeah.
Okay. Hmm. That's my question is, sometimes when we look at, let's just say we may have one Brazilian or two Brazilian players, and we know they're a part of the team. They want to be a part of the team. They've joined the team, and we look at them to, hey, what did he say or what did he mean? We kind of identify one as the spokesperson for him. Do you feel like that may put more pressure on the one who is bilingual?
He didn't really, I mean, it might in most cases, but in for our standpoint, he didn't have an issue with it. He was like actually very happy to do it for us because I mean, during the games it was kind of hard because it's fast paced and you can't really expect him to scream across the field what he's saying to us and also put his perspective on the field as well. But I mean, he helped him learn a little bit of English and like to communicate during the game, so that helped a lot as well.
It seemed as if it wasn't something that he was forced into. It seemed like that was something he was open to doing.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, I've worked with some teams, and sometimes when there is not as much diversity, you have some who have been they've been singled out as now the representative, or now they're going to speak for, fill in the blank. And sometimes that can cause a little discomfort. But it definitely sounds like you all were able to make sure that that was a good thing for everyone. Are they still part of the team, the international players?
They both graduated actually.
Okay. Seemed like they had a good experience though.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, good deal, good deal. So you say.
I would think so.
We got to interview them. Anyone else? I mean, topics of difficult conversation or topics that maybe there was a conflict on your team. And actually, you pointed out something very good. I mean, and I think that's a diversity among sports. There are teams who are very vocal, who communication is key and essential. But as we kind of alluded to, the difference between individual performance, it sometimes looks different when you have a job to do, you're focused on it, and you are going to go out there and sprint your 50 meter, get out the pool, cheer on the other athletes on your team, and then dry off and go home. Okay. So let me shift to my last question here. And this is a little bit more interesting. I say from the perspective of politics of hair, identity politics specifically. So a high school wrestler was asked to cut his hair before mid-season tournament. This is circa 2019, I believe. I can provide the reference. The governing body compiled and basically there was a national conversation, but they compiled information, I guess, throughout the state, and then confided with the National Federation of High Schools, and then they amended a hair length rule. So we're talking about, I'm just using the word legislation or legislating hair length for athletic performance in high school. So the ruling was hair length, what they call Rule 421. It now states that hair shall not extend below the top of an ordinary shirt collar in the back. And on the sides, the hair shall not extend below the earlobe. And in the front, the hair shall not extend below the eyebrows. Interestingly enough, they removed the term natural state. And I'm curious about what that meant. So what are your impressions of the rule that regulates hair and other cultural traditions, perhaps, when it comes to high school athletes? And since we have a swimmer and a leader on our panel, I'm curious also how maybe she received the information that the Olympics banned a company who manufactured hair caps for women with natural hair, or women and men, I'm assuming. But what are your impressions of of this rule?
I mean, personally, I didn't fully understand, like how you mentioned the caps. I didn't understand what the purpose behind the ban was and how that would have given them an advantage because it's a cap for hair.
Mhm.
I didn't see much. I felt like that was very unnecessary. And I mean, for the hair regulations for the wrestling,
Mhm.
I felt like maybe they could have implemented not a swim cap, but like a certain hair covering in
Mhm.
general just to keep that. Or I don't know. I was really surprised when I heard that story because I feel like I've seen so many wrestlers with long hair for the longest time
Mhm.
be okay with that. And so it was confusing that all of a sudden it was not okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think at the end of the day, like if it doesn't affect the like the result of the match, or it doesn't affect what happens during the match,
Mhm.
it shouldn't be an issue. And they can also tie their hair up. They can use like a cap or something to keep it in place while they're in the match instead of cutting it. And because a lot of people, like, they grow out that hair for a reason, like they like the hair, it matches their identity, and when they cut it, it's kind of like might I wouldn't say put them in a depressive state, but um it wouldn't it might make them have a lack of motivation to keep doing what they're doing.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you. What are your thoughts, Tatum, about politics of hair and maybe cultural implications?
Talking. Um, so I agree with you guys both. Like Christian said, hair is a part of a lot of people's identity. So when they're told they can't style it in the way they want, that's a real issue. And I think I think that's like with the swim cap rule, I think it was really unnecessary, and it didn't affect the results. It didn't affect anyone's performance. So I don't really feel like there was a need for the ban.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, it's very interesting because, there are
Also,
aspects.
oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Also, I think that when swim cap companies are making swim caps, they definitely should accommodate to different types of hair and textures and sizes. And I definitely think that they should take that into consideration when they make their swim caps, so that every African Americans and all other hair types can wear the swim caps.
Of course. And just to ask, how would a rule like that impact you on your team? Because Ashley, you've got some lovely locks. Um, how would a rule like that impact you in your sport, or for the panel? But love to start with Ashley.
Are you referring to the hair cutting?
Yeah, the hair length requirement. That would seem absurd in swimming, wouldn't it?
Yes, definitely. Especially since we do wear caps anyways. It's like what matters what's under. Um,
Mhm.
no, I definitely think even just as an overall statement, like creating rules to I feel like the bans you were referring to were just limiting people participating in sports, and I feel like for sports, we should only be encouraging participation and creating rules to accompany those people instead of just getting rid of them and not even allowing them to participate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Christian, what about you, sir? I think your hair may stand below your collar.
Yeah, I would say like a lot of people, their hairstyle, like they use it like as a stand, like to stand out, like if they want to stand out on the field or stand out in a match. Some people dye their hair, or like they do it to a certain length that they get noticed and they want to be noticed. So like regulating that hair length and how they can manage their hair can like is kind of just wrong, and it's not good for identity. And I know I wouldn't be happy at all. I mean, I wouldn't stop playing soccer, of course. I wouldn't just be like quit on the spot because I have to cut my hair. But it's just a matter of it's my personal like choice, and it shouldn't be regulated by someone else.
Mhm. I like that. Thank you. Tatum, how would this rule impact you or maybe another person on your team or your teams in multiple sports?
I don't really see it being an issue on like track, cross country, or soccer, because no one on my team really has, like, usually people wear their hair in like a braid or a ponytail, so it's never too long. But I don't know. I don't really think it really affects too much of our performances.
And the Olympic track stars like those super long games.
And like I've seen in the Olympics where they, like, the track stars will have their hair like super long and they'll have like long nails, but I don't know if that even affects their performance.
So there should be a performance aspect assessed on that. How well it may be able to help you or inhibit maybe performance. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Politics of hair, and it's really interesting. I was reading an article just as I was thinking about our discussion today. And I'll pull it up just briefly as we close, because sometimes we think it's like, well, what's the fuss? What's the hubbub? But there are a lot of different aspects of hair, and it's very personal. So I pulled up this one, and I was drawn to it. 3 girls, soccer players, cut their hair short. Now they're accused of being boys. And so just an interesting thought about hair and about how it has, it can elicit a reaction, but it has a lot of different feeling in our society. And this is just a wonderful, interesting article when you're thinking about how their identity was challenged because of their hair length. And so I want to end my portion in here. Maybe we have others who want to discuss this. We're simply saying that what's personal in terms of diversity, sometimes what's personal could be, it could be fodder for ridicule or subjective thoughts and ridicule and feedback. I will tell you that the referee who asked a young man, the wrestler, to cut his hair, he was suspended for 2 years. I would argue that maybe those in New Jersey felt that maybe his decision was unwarranted. And so we have to really dig deeper and understand the politics of hair and how it could be used to inhibit performance, and it could be used to challenge one's ethnic expression. So with that, thank you all to the panel, but I think I'd be open to any other questions, thoughts from the other participants in the audience.
Dr. Miller, I'd like to get a question to you and kind of get feedback from the panelists as well. How do you, what if we have some representatives that are come from teams or towns that don't really have a lot of diversity, but some team members might feel like it's an important topic to discuss? How do you think, if you come from maybe a sport or just where you live geographically, you just don't have a lot. How do you go about starting these conversations when you don't really have a starting place?
Yeah, really great question. Honestly, this is the role of the governing bodies, so for the Florida, this particular body here, Florida High School um, Association, I mean, this is critical to be maybe the beacon of informed dialogue and informed discussion. And I think for those who are participating in towns and communities where there's minimal diversity, I think being able to contact the FHSAA and really inquire about how do we go about promoting this level of discussion in our classrooms, in our school. We recognize that we're focusing primarily on high school student athletes, but surely we do have assets, in our shared communities. And this is what Ashley was saying. This is the importance of having internet, social media, where we can find, resources or speakers or people who are trying to elevate dialogue and conversation. And that's the goal. How do we promote informed conversation, utilizing whether it be organizations throughout our state, or maybe local, or maybe neighboring communities. I think those people who are in those positions um, or as administrators should do a pretty good job of making sure that that's a topic on their website or on their promotional material. We're talking about DEI, not because it's new and trendy, but because we want to make sure everyone who has a diverse identity in our community feels like there's an outlet.
And I have one final question too, before we can open it up. And I hope some of our student participants can ask Dr. Miller questions because he's got a wealth of knowledge. But how would you best want to handle conflicts if there are issues that come up on the teams? What suggestions can you give to maybe team captains or those that aren't in the captain's role, how to kind of handle potentially difficult conversations?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. So I think it begins with being able to hear one out and position taking, being able to take one's position, being able to understand what's your perspective. Please share yours. I'm going to share mine. And how do we, particularly in teams, so even if your team doesn't need to have these rich dialogues, if there's more than two people, that's a team. And so the reality of the matter is, how do we come together to share perspective? And really, how do we create learning opportunities? And we've seen a lot of this throughout our country in different spheres. NFL, one player makes a statement or does this, another player says, hey, I didn't really take that comment to be informed. Let's sit down and talk about it. And that's our goal. We have to begin a dialogue of open, honest discussion, because the more we know about others from different communities, different cultural, ethnic backgrounds, different identities, I want to make sure I'm inclusive here. We have to ask the questions and then be okay with listening. May not agree with everything we hear or everything we learn. But on teams, the importance of cohesion. Remember I said, remove the individual identity, create a shared identity. That's essential. What is your commitment to the team? You're unique. I want to know more about you. That's the team captain role. Okay, now last question. How do you promote your commitment to the team? What does it look like? And so one of the things I would be very brief in expressing here, one of the challenges is with our people who identify as Muslim or from Islam. And during Ramadan, that's a significant challenge that, there's a cultural expression that's taking place that has dietary restrictions and limitations. So teammates, the leadership, the school, they have to work to be informed to not only support that player and their family, but also share the information with the team. And so that's the cultural exchange we have to be able to promote, to be able to have those informed dialogue and discussion. So it's intentional and from the top. And as students, I empower you all not being afraid to have those dialogues and ask your administrators to get more resources.
And then for our panelists, what kind of advice would you give to fellow student athletes if they have to, we've talked about a lot of different topics here, but if you had to have a difficult conversation with a teammate or, somebody around your team, what advice would you give to fellow student athletes to be able to have productive, even if they're difficult conversations?
I think first I would pull aside whoever it is that I would like to talk to about this. And I would start by saying, I would point out whatever they did wrong that I didn't like. And then I would explain how that was wrong and kind of like ask them if they understand. And then if they did or if they didn't understand, depending on their response, if they give a negative response, then I would probably get like an administrator involved or like a coach involved. But if they give a positive response, then that's good.
Also, something I heard earlier was kind of the difference between being liked versus being respected. And I think that's important to keep in mind is that there's going to be times where people are going to be like, ugh, I don't want to have this conversation, but it is a conversation that has to be had. And I've had some occasional uncomfortable conversations, but I think the most important thing is ensuring that they grow from that and just kind of make sure everything is in order, I guess.
I'd say just like don't do it while practice is going on. Like wait until after or before to have the conversation. Make sure like they're in a serious state and they don't have their mind on anything else. And if you don't see any improvements, take them aside again and like keep bugging them and keep bugging them over and over again until, and if you just don't see any improvement at all, that's when you try to get your coach involved and talk to your coach about the issue and have them try to resolve the issue. But of course, you're supposed to be the first person to try to get it resolved. So just keep attempting until like it's to the point where they're not listening and they don't respect you. So you just need to get the coach involved. But of course, you need to get respected by your teammates first before you can have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I add one thing to that? For the leaders, this is the importance of when you talked with your teammates in the very beginning or when you're building those connections, ask them how do they prefer feedback. People are different. And so I'm sure if you all have watched, The Last Dance, which is a documentary about the 96 Bulls, there are some different personalities on that team. Point I'm making is Coach Jackson understood how he should approach each individual player, and taking time to understand how they receive feedback and how they respond to feedback is essential.
Thank you. I think you all brought up some really valuable points and considerations for handling potentially difficult topics. Before we toss it over to allowing our student viewers to ask any questions, I would just kind of want to open up to our panelists one more time. Any final thoughts or feedback that you would like to share with our viewers that are watching? If there's none, that's fine, no worries. And finally, I know we have a quieter group now, but if there's any questions that you'd like to present to our panelists or ask questions, we would love to have your feedback. If you, we have like Dr. Miller's knowledge on both of these topics. So if you've got questions or comments, please let us know. All right, well, I'm seeing none, but like I said, I will be providing Dr. Miller's contact information. So if you've got a question you feel like is better to be asked in a one-on-one environment, you will have his information, and feel free to utilize any of the resources of any of our panelists that we've had for this presentation. If there are no other comments or questions, I want to thank our Dr. Miller for his time today, and our student athlete panelists for sharing their experiences and taking the time to provide a relatable eye to our the FHSAA's largest stakeholders, which is our student athletes. We offer things from a competitive sports environment to our leadership seminars to our student advisory panels to give you all opportunities. So I thank you for participating in this opportunity. I do plan, all these webinars were recorded, so I do plan on getting them uploaded to YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow, if not early next week. And I will send out the links so you can share them with your teammates or rewatch them, whatever you'd like to do. They will be on our YouTube channel. Like I mentioned in the first session, if you'd like to get more involved with the FHSAA beyond just participating in your sport, we are currently accepting nominations for our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Ashley, Christian, and Tatum were nominated for this committee and were selected and have served for this past year. So we like to give our Student Athlete Advisory Committee members unique opportunities, and we'd love for you to be nominated. You can reach out to your athletic directors regarding these applications. They are due end of August 26th, so you still have about a month to get nominations in. We'd love to have you apply. You all have my contact information in the email blast, but I'll send it out again. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. And thanks again for your participation. And schools just starts just around the corner. First day of practice for those participating in fall sports. It's really soon. I want to wish everybody good luck next school year. Hopefully we're moving towards a more normal school year, and everyone can have great seasons. I appreciate you all's time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.